Good morning, brethren, and welcome to our program entitled A Glance at the Word, which is broadcast live every Monday and every Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. West Africa time, which is GMT +1. Today is December the 14th, 2020, and our topic is, to what extent are you grateful? To what extent are you grateful? We ask the Lord to actually help us understand the importance of being grateful to Him, the importance of gratefulness, and to determine the extent at which or to which we are grateful to Him. Let's read the book of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 to 8. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 8. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your home. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, I gave half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. This is the story of Zacchaeus, and we're going to talk a lot about it. You know, as the Bible says, Zacchaeus was a tax collector, and as such, he was a dishonest man. All tax collectors in those times were dishonest. Tax collectors were known to be collecting much more than was required by the government or by the administration. They were known to be collecting much more and give to the administration only what the administration required of them. Let's take an example. Let's suppose that you were to pay $100 or euros or francs of taxes to the government. A tax collector will not take 100 from you. He will take maybe 150 or 200 or 300 or at times even 500. Then he would give 100 to the government, to the administration, and keep all the rest for himself. This is what tax collectors were doing. And chief tax collectors were even doing more. You know, the more you were a leader, the more you were an authority, an official in those times in tax collecting, the more taxes you would also collect, the more money you would collect from the people. So the people hated them because of their behaviors, because of the way they were collecting the people's money. The people hated them, and they themselves knew very well that the people hated them. They knew very well that people didn't like them, and they knew very well that they were committing sins with that kind of behaviors. They knew very well that they were sinners, but they didn't care, because for them what counted the most was their wealth, their personal wealth, what they were getting from their job as tax collectors. So Zacchaeus was a tax collector. And being a tax collector, being a dishonest man, being a sinner, he was aware that Jesus could not be his guest. So for him, he was convinced that Jesus would never come to him, talk to him, fellowship with him. He was convinced that Jesus had nothing to do with him because of his job of a tax collector, which was a job full of sins. Yet Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to see who that Jesus actually was. In fact, he knew that Jesus was a man of God. Everybody knew that Jesus was a man of God, that Jesus was performing miracles, that Jesus was a great prophet, as people were thinking in those times, because they thought that he was a prophet. And maybe Zacchaeus even knew that Jesus was a son of God. Maybe. But Zacchaeus was aware that he could not receive Jesus. He could not welcome Jesus into his house. But he wanted at least to see him, at least to see his face, at least to see how he was, what he resembled. And if he ever asked Jesus' disciples that he wanted to meet Jesus, I'm certain that the disciples would not accept, because of his faith. They would not accept. And Zacchaeus knew that they would not accept. So he decided just to peep an eye at Jesus, just to see how that Jesus was. But Zacchaeus was short. He wasn't tall. So because of the crowd surrounding Jesus while Jesus was walking, Zacchaeus could not see him. So the only thing to do for him was to climb up a tree, to climb up into a sycamore tree that was on the way through which Jesus was passing. And that's what he did. And let me tell you that it was not an easy matter for Zacchaeus to climb up into that tree. In the Roman Empire, they used to hire tax collectors who were already mature enough. And the minimum age was 35 years. If you were below 35 years of age, they could never hire you as a tax collector. And to become a chief tax collector required about 20 years of experience as a tax collector, which means that Zacchaeus was not younger than 55 years old by that time. And I'm even convinced that he was much more than that. But let's say that he was at least 55. You know, a 15-year-old child can climb up a tree easily. A 20-year-old young adult can climb up a tree a little bit easily. But a 55-year-old man would have much difficulty to climb up a tree. Believe me, I'm 65, so I can tell you that it's not easy. So Zacchaeus had to spend that effort, that great effort, to take that action of climbing up a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus. And that's what he did. And when Jesus arrived at that place, under that sycamore tree, he looked up. You know, normally, when you are walking, you don't walk looking up. Either you look down or you look straight ahead. You don't look up. But when Jesus arrived there, he looked up. He looked up because of the action that Zacchaeus has taken. What action are you willing to take for God to be interested in you? What action are you willing to take for God to look at you? For God to locate you even. So Jesus located Zacchaeus on that sycamore tree. What action are you willing to take for God to actually be interested in you and locate you? Look where you are and see you. So that was the first important thing that Zacchaeus did. He took that action, forgetting all the risk of climbing up a tree at his age, because he could have a bad fall. He could have a bad fall. But he didn't care. He climbed up that tree to see Jesus, only to see him. And Jesus said, Zacchaeus, he even called him by his name. God knows each of us by name. He says, Zacchaeus, come down hastily, because I want to stay at your house today. God is willing to be with us, to fellowship with us, to welcome us into his presence. But what action are we ready to do for him to welcome us in his presence? And God is telling us the same thing today. Come down from your tree. Come down from your pride. Come down for your filthy thoughts. Come down for your avariciousness. Come down. Because I want to fellowship with you. I want to welcome you into my presence. Zacchaeus came down. And after Jesus went into his house, I don't want to comment what people were saying that Jesus has gone to be a guest with a sinner. People will never be happy to see that you are being saved. People around you will not be happy to see that you are being blessed. That one we can talk about it another day. It's not the point today. But the point today is that Jesus became a guest at Zacchaeus' house. And Zacchaeus did the second very important thing. First, he gave half of all his wealth to the poor. So he divided all his belongings, all his goods, all his wealth into two. And he gave part of it to the poor. he was left only with half. But he didn't stop there. He said, I know that I was behaving badly toward people. I was extorting people. But now I've decided, everybody that I've extorted, I will give him fourfold what I have taken from him. Which means that after that, Zacchaeus would become very poor. But he didn't care. He was grateful to Jesus for being his guest. He was grateful to Jesus for coming into his house. He was grateful to Jesus for coming into his life. So he gave out of gratefulness. And you now, to what extent are you going to show your gratefulness to God? To what extent are you going to be grateful? What can you give the Lord to show your gratefulness? This is the question God is asking you today. How grateful are you for what God has done in your life? God has saved you from hell. God has spared your life. Maybe you were supposed to die during this pandemic. You didn't die. How grateful are you because of that? And let me tell you, each of us is supposed to be destroyed, but God spares our lives. Let's see what he says in Lamentations. Lamentations chapter 3 verse 22. We all know that verse very well. Lamentations chapter 3 verse 22 says, through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed. It means that we're supposed to be consumed. We're supposed to be destroyed. We're supposed to die. Yet we are still alive, only because of the Lord's mercies. To what extent are you going to show your gratefulness to God because of that? Because of those mercies of God? Because of God's compassions towards you? This is the main question now. I encourage you to be grateful to God. And the best way for you to show gratefulness to God is to do things that will please God. First thing that pleases God is when we win souls to him. You know, there is much joy in heaven when only one sinner repents. So involve yourself in evangelization. That is a way to show gratefulness to God. Second thing, give part of your assets, part of your money to your church for all the actions that the church is taking for God's glory. Think of it. Don't be just a consumer of your church's actions. Be a giver to your church because of the gratefulness that you have to show God for what God does to you through that same church. You have to be grateful to God. And thirdly, think of all the people who are suffering all around you, who are God's children, part of God's creation. Think about them also. Don't forget them. And God will be happy with you. To what extent are you grateful to God? Because of what God has done in your life. Because of what the Lord has done in your life. Dear brethren, I think we're going to stop here today. Just keep this in your mind. To what extent are you grateful to God because of all that He has done in your life? God bless you beyond all your expectations.